I believe, are live. Hold on. Welcome, everybody, to another IAEI News Live. My name is Thomas Dimitrovich, and today we are going to talk about two important topics. Three important topics. Servicing, commissioning, and maintenance. Those three topics are our topic of discussion on IAEI News Live, and it all starts now. All right, everybody. Whew, we're back. Okay, so I thought this would be an interesting discussion for our chat today. And so I wanted to cover all the different areas in the code that basically deal with these topics of servicing, maintenance, and commissioning. That's another big topic, right? So servicing, commissioning, and maintenance, three big topics. I'm just organizing my desktop here so I can see everything. For some reason I can't see everything. That's okay. All right, so I keep getting this question. It keeps coming up. I don't know how to how else to say it, but it just keeps popping up on across my desk, speaking to or trying to ask questions about this thing we call servicing, maintenance. I'll throw reconditioning in here too, because that's another area that I get questions about. And I'm just closing stuff on my, gosh, it's amazing how much stuff we have open, we can manage to open on our, whether it be an iPad or an iPhone or whatever it is. So in any case, I continue to get questions on the topic of reconditioning. Hey, there we go. Ryan Jackson. Now I can see. I was looking for this. All right, we got Nihad. We got Felix Sandoval, 11 a.m. for his location. Fred, good to see you here. David Engelhart, ETZ. Welcome to ETZ. And Ryan Jackson in the house. Hey, Mr. Bellantoni. Hopefully all is well with you, my friend. So this is I would say the concept of servicing, commissioning, and maintenance in the NEC is, at a minimum, it's controversial. We can agree to disagree on some things. This is one of those items that comes up in topics. We'll get I'll get the comments that, what do you call it? It's not appropriate for the National Electrical Code because the NEC deals with installation requirements. It doesn't deal with maintenance and servicing and all that good stuff. Hey, Lou Petrucci, good to see you, buddy. So, and I can't, in some cases, I can agree. I really can. I mean, you can, if you look at some of these, some of the requirements that you may find in the code. I'm just going to bring up my NFPA link. Hopefully everybody out there has a copy of NFPA link. because it is a very useful tool. So I'll get comments and questions about the requirements and not just the present. So the other controversy, or the other aspect of this, which I think is even more important than whether or not it belongs in the code, the question to ask is, how do you enforce it? How does an authority having jurisdiction look at the language and enforce the language? I've heard this term used years ago, and I absolutely loved it. I can't remember who it was, but there was a question about, it was when we were making changes in the code about being readily accessible. And they would throw up pictures and say, is this readily accessible? And it would show, I don't know, boxes and crates in front of something. And the person who answered the question looked at the image and said, all right, here's my guess. When the installation went in, those boxes and crates were probably not in front of that electrical distribution equipment. So when it was inspected, there was no code violation. What happens after the fact is not the responsibility of the AHJ. And they used this phrase, they said, you're an inspector, not an expector. And I liked that. Because out of everything that was said, that's what I remembered the most. And I remembered that entire dialogue because that phrase of you're an inspector, not an expector, really put things into perspective for me. And this is when I was young and impressionable. So in any case, this discussion, when I've heard, and I've been in those dialogues where they'll say, well, there should be nothing in the National Electrical Code regarding maintenance or reconditioning or servicing or commissioning. Well, commissioning is a little different. We'll say maintenance. I would disagree with that statement because I think there are places and there are valid requirements, which I want to take a look at here, that are in the code that I would say you want that in the code. It's not performing maintenance. These are installation requirements that are important for when maintenance is conducted. I don't know if that makes sense. So, having said all that, I'm going to go out on a limb, try something. I don't know if it's going to work. Nope. There it is. Oh, I know why. I know why. Tommy knows why. Hold on, peoples. I need to make a little change in the configuration. You see this little cord? This little cable is critically important. And I found out on this little accessory, I need to plug it into a specific area. Now let's see if this works. Boom! Booyah! All right, so, hey, Robert from Omaha. Hey, I apologize for not being able to get to you, buddy. I have been on calls literally all morning. Steve Cavaleris from New York. How's New York these days? And Lou Petrucci. All right, so let's do this. All right, so servicing, commissioning, and maintenance. First thing, let's take a look at the definition of servicing. It's the process, and that's in Article 100. So in Article 100, if you search for servicing, there's no E in servicing. Did you know that? So The definition of servicing is the process of following manufacturers, not all manufacturers, just a manufacturer's set of instructions or applicable industry standards to analyze, adjust, or perform prescribed actions upon equipment with the intention to preserve or restore the operational performance of the equipment. So I will say, number one, there is no defined term for maintenance. Did you know that? Maintenance is not a defined term. I don't know if maintenance is a defined term in NFPA 70B. I'm going to take a look in 70B. Now remember, 70B, the definitions are in Chapter 3 or Chapter Maintenance. Control F. Maintenance. I'm doing a search inside of 70B. Oh. They have condition of maintenance, and the condition of maintenance in 70B is defined as the state of the electrical equipment, considering the manufacturer's instructions, manufacturer's recommendations, and applicable industry code standards and recommended practices. Well, and they took that out of 70E. There's no definition of what maintenance is in 70B. So, what do we mean by maintenance? And the only reason I went down this road was because when I read servicing, what would be the difference? Okay, so there's an informational note under servicing that says, I got to bring up. It says servicing often encompasses maintenance and repair activities. So, okay, so encompasses maintenance and repair activities, but we don't know what a maintenance activity is. We could go to Merriam-Webster, right? Oh man. Let me look up Webster definition of maintenance. The act of maintaining. It's almost like I bet you the 70E committee that created the definition of unqualified person, which is that who is not qualified, probably created the definition of maintenance, which is the act of maintaining. It says the act of maintaining, the state of being maintained. So let's go back to maintenance, definition of maintenance. The act of maintaining, the state of being maintained. The building has suffered from years of poor maintenance. That sounds like it, right? So let's take a look at what does maintaining mean. To keep in an existing state, repair, efficiency, or validity. Preserve from failure or decline. To sustain against opposition or danger. To continue or preserve, to keep it up. So I think it's to sustain against opposition. To keep in an existing state as of repair, efficiency, or validity, preserve from the failure or decline. That's got to be it. All right, David Engelhardt, Tommy. Okay, Steve. Okay, seen many installations that when I go do some service that someone had done something that is such a violation that it is a hazard. The response is usually, well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Joseph Violi. Felix. Yes, that definition of servicing is from the National Electrical Code. Thank you, Felix. Servicing and maintenance different. Servicing and maintenance. Robert, preserve or restore, but not repair or replace. I see your point. Preserve or restore. Yes. Not replace. Yeah, I would agree with that. Replacements, you may get to a point of servicing where you have to replace it, the end of life of the equipment. Let me think here. Such as maintenance is not covered in the NEC, nothing can be said post original inspection. So Fred, okay, so let's get back to, that is what servicing accomplishes. All right, so there's no definition of maintenance either in any NFPA document, so we fall back on Merriam-Webster. Servicing is well defined. Now let's take a look at how servicing is used, and we have a section of the code where in Article 110, servicing and maintenance of equipment. What 110.17 was relatively, I think it was new for the 2023 code, if I'm not mistaken. 110.17, yes, it is new for the 2023 code. Servicing and electrical preventive maintenance shall be performed by qualified persons. So then we have to go back to qualified person. That's another discussion. Right, Robert from Omaha? I mean, that's another very, I know it's near and dear to your heart. Understanding what is a qualified person? What is a qualified person for conducting maintenance is another discussion, right? So I might be qualified to install it. Put it this way, my vehicle, here's a good example. I'm a qualified person on a motorcycle. I'm a qualified person to drive a car as well. I've got both my both certifications, or passed both tests. I'm not gonna say anything more than that. But am I qualified to work on a BMW in all of its intricacies, a Ford, a Chrysler, the computer system? There are things that I can do. Am I qualified? That's another discussion, because if you look at the qualified person and what the definition of a qualified person, you have to have skills and knowledge related to the construction and operation of the electrical equipment and installations, and has received safety training to recognize and avoid the hazards that are involved. The definition of a qualified person doesn't talk about the installation skills in regard to installation requirements. Doesn't talk about, in the definition, the skills with regard to performing maintenance or testing. But we know that you have to have some level of knowledge. And if you look at 110.17, the language says, servicing and electrical preventive maintenance shall be performed by qualified persons trained in servicing and maintenance of equipment. So you have those qualifiers. That's right, Robert. I might be qualified to drive them, but I'm not qualified to work on them. And if you look at 110.17, it's telling you that the individual who's performing the work has to understand and know how to maintain and service equipment, because that's a completely different set of skill set. It says the servicing and electrical preventive maintenance shall be performed in accordance with the original equipment manufacturer's instructions. So there's two items. One tells us that when you do service and preventive maintenance, it has to be performed in accordance with, now you can, as I read through this, think about what is the National Electrical Code. The National Electrical Code is an installation requirement. as for the electrical inspectors, how would you enforce this? The only way you could enforce this is if you're coming to the job site and they say they pulled a permit because they were making modifications to existing equipment. They could be adding a circuit, a feeder to a, I don't know, switchboard or switch gear or panel board, and at the same time they may be servicing and maintaining that panel board. They may have performed service and maintenance. And at that point, when you're looking at that installation, this could trigger you to say, okay, who did the maintenance? Show me their qualifications. That'd be the only time, in my opinion. It's either on David Engelhart. Hurricane Ian tested a number of individuals to this regard in Southwest Florida. David, you just threw a really important item on the table that I never thought about. When you go to a site that has seen, in your example, storm damage, you have storm damage and they are getting things back up and running again. Now you're into servicing and maintenance. That's a very good point. That you're looking at a piece of equipment that has seen some damage, maybe some water damage, and you need to address it. Then you could move into the world of reconditioning, right? So that's the other aspect of let's look at reconditioning. Remember, there's another term in there, and the reason why we added the term servicing was because we were having a hard time with when we recondition something. So in this case here, the term reconditioned, electromechanical systems, equipment, apparatus, or components that are restored to operating conditions. Oh man, this is David. This is really good. I like where you're going with this, because now it really helps. It helps me understand this, and I think it'll help me convey a recent public input I made to the public comment I just made to the 2026 code, where we adjusted the language in the .3s of each of the code articles that deal with reconditioning. They said reconditioned equipment shall not be installed. And my problem and my heartburn with that is that what if it's already installed? If it's already installed, does that mean I can recondition it? So you take that example that you just gave of being down in Florida and Hurricane Ian, and you take, say, a panel board, or say that there are circuit breakers that were installed in that panel and they received whatever, and you don't, you're not taking the breakers out and doing your magic and then installing them. You're going to basically recondition in place. I got a broken handle. I do all these different things and I'm not installing the equipment. The equipment is already installed, but the new language in the 2026 code, the new language says, I'll tell you what it says. And I believe it's all open now. Everybody can view the next edition of the code. Looks like this. So if you go to nfpa.org/70 and you click on next edition, you have now the ability to submit a public comment and view the first draft. So I'm going to take a look at the first draft, and I'll give you what the language is that the first draft says, and I'll tell you my heartburn with it. And I made a public input here recently. So 210.3, I'll just grab 210.3. It says, the following reconditioned equipment shall not be installed. Well, the problem with that is, that means I can recondition that equipment in place. I'm not installing it. So I wanted to change that. My public comment is the following reconditioned equipment shall not be permitted. I use the word permitted. So that way, whether you're installing it or it's in place, you're not permitted that equipment. And then we identify that equipment, right? So it's not like all reconditioned equipment. Some equipment can be reconditioned. So, David, that language, the reconditioned equipment language, what's 110.3b? 110.3 is your examination, and 3b is installation and use. That's installation and use instructions shall not reduce the requirements of this code. That looks like that's going to be in part of the next edition of the code. But if I look at the NFPA link, zoomed in. So anyway, that perspective, David, is very helpful, because I was struggling with when would you have an existing installation that you would need to consider this for. That's a really good low-hanging fruit. I can give other examples from a reconditioning perspective. But now servicing and maintenance, if I go back to 110.17, if you go back to 110.17, and you look at the language in 110.17, what is it? That's informational note number 1. There's a list item 1 performed. So it gets into telling you that you can service and maintain equipment as long as you perform it, as long as a qualified person's doing it, right? It's performed in accordance with OEM instructions. Information included in the listing information, applicable industry standards as approved by the AHJ. And then list item 2 tells you that you have about the replacement parts, and the replacement parts have to be provided by the OEM. They have to be designed by an engineer that's experienced in the design of replacement parts. So if you are, it's starting to make sense to me on why it might be applicable for the code from this servicing and maintenance of equipment. If you are modifying components and whatnot and installing them, you may or may not need to pull a permit. But if you do need to pull a permit, if your jurisdiction requires that, or if you're the AHJ, then you are modifying the installation. The AHJ doesn't have to be a government employee, right? I know in West Virginia they're hired individuals, and if your state does not, for example, in our area here, if I add a receptacle to the house, based upon where I live, I don't need to pull a permit for that. Who's the AHJ? That would be myself as the homeowner, or whomever the homeowner is in their jurisdiction, that person, that individual is the authority having jurisdiction. Are they qualified? You know, if it was another individual somewhere who's not, from an electrical perspective, and that's not just electrical, but structural. I mean, if you make a modification in your structure, if you're not qualified, you're the HJ, you may need to get expertise involved to look at what you're doing to make sure you're doing it correctly, even though it's not required by law. It's a good business decision. It's a good protection of the investment, all that good stuff. But you're still the HJ, and you should be following these requirements, or somebody should. Designed by an engineer experienced in the design of replacement parts. That might be, I think that might be easy, because all you'd have to do is find the organization. If it's a reputable organization, if it's an individual working out of their garage, you'd need to have something that says they know what they're doing. I mean, I'm an electrical engineer. That doesn't mean I'm qualified to make parts for electrical distribution equipment. I'll tell you, I'm not qualified for that. Just because you're an engineer does not mean you're qualified. And it says designed by an engineer experienced in the design. So you'd have to look who that is, and you'd have to ask for, what experience do you have, or does your organization have, in the design of replacement parts for this type of a piece of equipment that you're servicing or maintaining? That's a valid question if you're going to go down the route of B. Because ultimately, the AHJ's got to approve this. And what do we do? What is the AHJ? When the AHJ gains, confidence in the installation, when they look for that listing mark, when they look for the label. They may look for the label as, even if it's a reputable manufacturer, you may not, there's probably credibility from depending upon the manufacturer, right? You may say, look, this is not listed equipment, but I know this manufacturer has been in business since, whenever, and they make a lot of listed equipment. They know how to make equivalent equipment. It's a good quality equipment. That may raise your confidence in that piece of equipment or that installation. You may have a contractor. You may say, look, I know this contractor. They build X amount of buildings in this jurisdiction, and I've inspected their work, their quality A1 work, etc. You may have a higher confidence in one, either a manufacturer or a contractor or whatnot, or even a design engineer, in the design, the quality of the design. You may have respect for and confidence in that company or an individual or firm, and less in another, because maybe the other that's coming across your desk, they might be very well qualified. But you would be fair to ask for that if you've never seen them before. Hold on, let's read Robert. So we got Fred. Oh wow, Daryl Hill in the house. Both definitions use restore. So what is normal servicing? Normal servicing. Do we use the word normal servicing, Daryl? Oh, let me just servicing. I like yeah, the process differs from you're right. Article 100, reconditioned. What is normal servicing? Let's go back to servicing. Go back to the definition of servicing. Servicing says the process of following a manufacturer's set of instructions or applicable industry standards, analyze, adjust, or perform prescribed actions upon equipment with the intention to preserve or restore the operational performance of the equipment. And recondition says electromechanical systems, equipment, apparatus, or components that are restored to operating conditions. This process differs from normal servicing. I think the word normal should come out. I don't know let me see if we changed that. But here's what I think the difference is, Daryl. we say the process of following a manufacturer's set of instructions. The moment you have manufacturer's instructions in the picture, the moment you have that in the picture, manufacturer's instructions or applicable industry standards, even if you are restoring the operational performance, you're not in reconditioning because you're just following. And here's what I would liken it to. I would liken that to, I'll give you an example. I had a transfer switch in my previous home. I had a transfer switch, automatic transfer switch that there was a contactor inside that went bad. So I called the manufacturer. I happened to know them. I called the manufacturer and they said, "Oh yeah, we know about that. We sell a repair kit or whatever for it, for different things that you may have to fix." And that relay was one of those. So they sent me this kit, which had the relay and a couple other items in it. And I only needed to use one of the items in the kit, which was to replace that relay that went bad. And I had instructions on exactly what to do. That did not meet the definition of reconditioning because I fell into the category of servicing, which was following manufacturer's set of instructions. And I was bringing and restoring it to operational performance. When I look at the definition of reconditioned, it says restored to operating condition that differs from servicing of equipment that remains within a facility or replacement of listed equipment on a one-to-one basis. So, for example, a panel board. I could say my panel board. If I have a circuit breaker in my panel board that failed, and I am going to replace and fix the panel board by putting in a new circuit breaker, I'm not reconditioning the panel board. I'm not reconditioning the circuit breaker because I'm replacing the existing circuit breaker with another listed circuit breaker component. So it's a one-for-one relationship. I would not fall under the definition of reconditioned. I'm in servicing. That's, I think, Daryl, the difference between what's in servicing. When I service something and bring it to operational performance, I'm walking through prescribed actions upon equipment, following a process based on manufacturer sets of instructions or applicable industry standards. So that's where to analyze, adjust, or perform prescribed actions upon equipment. I could construe that, Daryl. I could say NFPA 70B no. Your statement is very thought provoking. I really need to think about that. And the where I got caught up, Daryl, was when it says following manufacturer set of instructions or applicable industry standards for servicing. If the standards for servicing included how to take a molded case circuit breaker apart and clean the contacts and put it back together again, I could argue that's servicing. Based upon an industry prescribed, an industry standard. Applicable industry standards. So, what is an industry standard? What is an industry standard? It's not a defined term in the code. That's where I think that's the area of possible, that's the backdoor concern I would have, Daryl. If it's a standard, I believe it's got to go through a process. It doesn't say an ANSI standard. Applicable industry standard is what I think we need to understand more. Exercising the circuit breaker would be under maintenance if the manufacturer, yes, Steve Cavaleris, I agree with you 100%. Exercising a circuit breaker, doing all of those are all, I would say, servicing, and I wouldn't use maintenance, right? And I wouldn't use the word repair anywhere in the code. And I went through and I made a bunch of public inputs to fix that issue of using the term repair, because if you say repair, are you talking servicing, or are you talking, if you say you're permitted to repair, are you permitting reconditioning, or are you permitting just servicing? So I think because we have a defined term servicing, because we have a defined term reconditioning, we need to keep those two distinctive, and we need to use the right terms in the right locations. So what I did for the public input phase of the 2026 code was I went through and I looked at every place where we said repair, and I entered the right word, whether it would be reconditioning or servicing. And I believe everywhere that I found it was servicing and not reconditioning. But if you just say repair, it's vague. And I could say I'm repairing it, I'm reconditioning, and it's permitted because it says I shall repair it. I'm permitted to repair. But if we said no, it's really servicing, because you have to follow manufacturer's set of instructions or applicable industry standards to bring this back into operational performance, then that's servicing. If I'm going outside of what a manufacturer tells you you can do with their product, now you are reconditioning it. Very good distinction. So 700.2 says you can't recondition a transfer switch, but if I just call it servicing, right, but Daryl, I see your point on 700, because 700 is life safety equipment. But I would argue 700.2, reconditioned transfer switches shall not be permitted. I love that language. That's in the 2023 code. If you are following manufacturer's instructions for that Article 700 or that type of transfer switch, if you're following manufacturer's instructions, say, for example, you damaged the door, and the manufacturer of that transfer switch says, hey, I have a new door. I have a replacement door for you. Here is the door and the instructions for putting that door on. In my case, a relay inside the transfer switch. If I have instructions on how to replace when a component fails, how to replace it, how to get it back into commission, because I have those instructions, because you're following manufacturer's instructions, you meet and fall, and you're falling under servicing, not reconditioning. And I don't know where that would be a problem. Because if a manufacturer goes through that process of creating catalog numbers, creating part numbers, creating installation instructions, and then if there's any testing that needs to be performed after you make that modification or you do that work on that transfer switch, I would argue you're following the manufacturer's instructions. Anything you do really falls back on the manufacturer, right? Because here's the thing. If you called it reconditioning, and if it was permitted, you'd have to put your name on it. You'd have to take off the UL listing mark and everything on from it, etc. Otherwise, the integrity of the equipment still falls under the original manufacturer. You're following the original manufacturer's instructions. But what 700.2 doesn't say is what is the extent of servicing that's permitted and what governs what a manufacturer can put together, right? Very interesting point, Daryl. I mean, do those instructions on replacement parts, etc., get a third-party review? I don't know that they do. I don't know that they don't either, but that is a question left to the mind. Now, what did you guys and gals in, let's take a look. Only if there was an HJ to look at. 700.3, see, you put reconditioned transfer switches shall not be installed. So Daryl, here's a problem. In my opinion, that language, 700.3, what I did, even if you took an existing transfer switch and said, this relay failed, that bus bar, the screws came out, or whatever, and you didn't remove it from installation and you just reconditioned it in place, your language in 700.3 saying reconditioned transfer switches shall not be installed, you're not violating that section of the code anymore. It said, if it said not be permitted, you would be violating it if you reconditioned it in place. That's my heartburn with that language. So I have a lot of heartburn. I think that the style manual overreached its bounds. It was stepped out of its boundaries by saying that the language had to say that. They started to write code that did not get public review. It's okay to say 700.3 should be reserved for reconditioned equipment, but it's not okay for them to tell you what language you need to put in there, because the language they put in there in the style manual may be okay for some applications, but is not okay for other applications. So Daryl, regardless of what you feel about reconditioning or servicing, anything you do to an existing transfer switch, whether it's an Article 700, 701, 708, as long as you're not installing a transfer switch that has been reconditioned, you can recondition it, you can service it, you can do anything you want to it because of that language that's being proposed for the 2026 code cycle. I think it needs to be fixed. But your point on the difference between servicing and reconditioning is very compelling. And we need to really take a close look at that. That's a very good point. Okay, so we've got 110.17 gets us into servicing, and there's a lot of other requirements around reconditioning. Here's another. Now, so we could have our arguments about 110.17 and say, does that belong in the code? What about this section, 210.63, that says equipment that requires servicing? Now, this is there should be no debate on whether or not this is suitable for language in the National Electrical Code, because what this is doing is saying when you have equipment that requires servicing, you're not requiring servicing, you're saying when equipment may require servicing, you need to put a receptacle there. And we have in 210.8, we have a requirement that receptacle be GFCI protected. So in 210.63, we say heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration equipment is going to need a receptacle, and indoor service equipment and indoor equipment rated requiring dedicated equipment spaces requires a receptacle to be placed there. And then again in 210.8, we're saying, hey, you better GFCI protect the daggone thing. So that is I think, an effective use of servicing, or effective use of the term servicing, and an effective use of the term servicing and an appropriate code requirement that is related to the topic of servicing. Make sense? Now let's talk about commissioning real quick. Commissioning is a completely different beast. This is the process of procedures and testing. Used to set up and verify the initial performance. So I was going through the code. So what I'm showing on the screen is the definition in the 2023 code, right? I immediately went to 230.95 because in 230.95 we require ground fault protection of equipment to be tested on installation, and you would think that would be titled commissioning. And you have in 230.95, we have settings, we have fuses, we have performance testing. Well, honestly, I think 230.95C should probably simply be called commissioning, because it is testing used to set up and verify the initial performance, operational controls, safety systems, and sequence of operation of electrical devices and equipment prior to being placed into active service. That is what 230.95C really is addressing. So, in my opinion, 230.95C should be titled commissioning. Then I looked at 240.87. 240.87 and 67, Charlie, is titled performance testing as well. That, in my opinion, should be commissioning, because I think commissioning is more encompassing. Commissioning is the process, the procedures, and testing used to set up and verify the initial performance, operational controls, any safety systems, and sequence of operation of electrical devices and equipment prior to being placed into active service. So, in my opinion, anywhere where we have performance testing, we should be using the term commissioning. That's why we put it in. Now, commissioning, if I did a search through the code, it's used in these areas. Obviously you have the definition. We use it in 240.6. Now, 240.6, that's your standard ampere rating. And we use the term commissioning in relationship to cybersecurity, I believe. I say that, and I want to make sure that I am accurate. D, remotely accessible. The circuit breaker, a cybersecurity assessment of the network is completed. Documentation of the assessment and certification shall be made available to those. Okay, it's not used there. Where is commissioning? Oh, I know where it's at. It is in the informational note. It's not in the positive language. In informational note number 2, it says example of the commissioning certification. It's not in the positive text, but it is in the informational note. Examples of the commissioning certification used to demonstrate that the system has been investigated for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. That's how they're using it in 240.6. 700.3, I think we just talked about, right, Daryl? Daryl Hill, 700.tree. 700.3 is test and maintenance. Commissioning witness test. The authority having jurisdiction shall conduct or witness the commissioning of the complete system upon installation and periodically afterwards. You don't need, all you need is 700.3. Well, let's look at 700.3. Let's look at this. So in 700.3, it says, tested periodically, Daryl. Systems shall be tested periodically on a schedule. Felix, shall inspection be carried out after commissioning? Let's think about that. Felix Sandoval asks, shall inspection be carried out after commissioning? I'm not sure about that one. It depends. I think if commissioning is required, you want to be there while it's. You know what, Felix? That's another good question. Order of the process, right? I think you have to do inspections throughout the entire phase. You'll have like we do with residential dwelling units. You have rough in, and then you have you have different phases of the inspection. So you may need to get into equipment before you get things ready to be commissioned, so that you can look at grounding and bonding and everything else. So I think, Felix, the answer to that question is that inspections being carried out after commissioning, there probably is a necessity to do that. But I would say that doesn't mean you wait before you even go visit till after commissioning. You're going to need to be there throughout the entire construction phase. So I would say no. I would say when you say shall inspection be carried out after commissioning, I think after commissioning, you're looking at literature and documentation. You've walked through the grounding, the bonding, the conductor sizing, the protection, all of those details, the installation, how the equipment has been secured to the ground or the wall or whatever. You're looking at everything throughout the construction phases. Are there steps in the inspection to be performed after commissioning? I would say yes. What those are, it depends. But this one in 700.3, tested periodically. Thanks, Nihad. Thanks for joining in. We'll talk to you soon. Yes, we have a lot of work to do on our ESW paper and our book. Tested periodically. Systems shall be tested periodically on a schedule approved by the AHJ to ensure the systems are maintained in a proper operating condition. Daryl, how do we enforce that one? I mean, is this appropriate for the National Electrical Code, or is this a part of 70B? Maintenance. Look at this. Maintenance. Emergency system equipment shall be maintained in accordance with manufacturer's instructions and industry standards. So I'm starting to understand this maintenance and servicing. I would argue where's servicing in here? Maintenance. Should this be titled servicing? I'm going to take a look and see, I can't remember if I made a public input I didn't. Oh, wait. Yes, you did. Okay. It's just all right. So, who drove the public input on this one? It's not there. So this is a first revision. Instead of maintenance, it says servicing. Emergency system equipment shall be maintained or serviced in accordance with manufacturer's instructions. So the defined term servicing is not an inclusive term to also cover the language maintenance when it is used in this and other related documents. The title of section 704 is commissioning and maintenance. And in this level C requirement, it uses shall be maintained, not servicing, in accordance with. So you voted against this one. 110.17 is titled servicing and maintenance. NFPA 70B is titled using maintenance, and it is consistently used throughout this entire document. Removing maintenance in this requirement leaves inconsistencies throughout this section. Ooh, okay. But do you see what I think, Daryl? I think we're all looking and wanting the same thing. It's just how you get there. All right. It is 1 o'clock. Hit that like button. Thank you, Lou, for joining in. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. Daryl, you are the man. Appreciate you you dialing in. Freddie B, thank you for joining in. Robert from Omaha. Daryl Hill, Fred, Steve Cavaleris. Who else was in here? I know we had David Engelhardt in the house. Who else we got in here? Robert, Felix Sandoval, Joseph Violi. Thanks for joining in. Lou Petrucci, Joe Bellantoni, Ryan Jackson. We had a great lineup of people dialing in and commenting. So, changing lubricants, oil, and fuel filters of the prime mover are servicing or maintenance. Good question. I'm going to answer that question. So if we look at the defined term servicing, go back to the defined term servicing, right? So if I go back to the defined term servicing, Felix, the process of following a manufacturer's set of instructions or applicable industry standards to analyze, adjust, or perform prescribed actions upon equipment with the intention to preserve, restore the operational performance of the equipment. And it says informational note, servicing often encompasses maintenance. So I would say that is maintenance, and I would qualify that as servicing. Because when you're servicing it's something, you are maintaining it. That's my thoughts on it. Daryl Hill, thank you very much for joining in. Felix, I hope we answered your questions. Great questions, Felix. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be down. Remember, I'm going to be down in Colombia, in Bogota. I think in October. I can't remember what month. August, September, somewhere in there. Hopefully, Felix will get to take a photo together. Do a selfie. Joseph Wages, thank you very much. Thank you for joining in and tuning in. Joseph Violi, thanks everybody. Listen, it was great. It was fun. It was real fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next week. Let's see, next week. I should be able to go live next week as well. I don't see any reason not to be able to go live next week as well. We will be live next week. There's a topic you want to cover. Is there something you want to see? There's something you want to talk about? Let me know. Shoot me an email you can use my shortened one, tdomitrovich@gmail.com. tdomitrovich@gmail.com. Let me know if you want a topic that you want to talk about. And let me know if you want to go live. All right, everybody. Take care. Stay safe. And please stay healthy. Thanks for everything that you do for the electrical industry. See you next week.